Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Welcome to another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell. And if you are curious about how to create a culture where people are agile, you are in for a treat today because I have an expert on this very topic. And my guest is Paula Caligiuri. Paula, welcome to my show.
Oh, it's so nice to be here, Meredith. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you join us. And I want to give a shout out to Damon Lemby, who was a former guest on my show. And we have both been guests on his podcast. And he's the one who introduced us. So I'm delighted that he did, because I think the topic that you are an expert in is of such importance and will be so valuable to my listeners today. So thank you for joining me. Let me tell my audience just a little bit about you. You have so many amazing credentials. I narrowed it down so we had lots of time to have our conversation. Paula is a distinguished professor at Northeastern University at DeMoore McKim School of Business. And she's also the founder and CEO of a company we're going to talk a little bit about later, Skiilify. Paula's specialty is around the importance of cultural agility as a critical leadership competence. She goes into detail about this topic in her excellent book, Build Your Cultural Agility, the 9 Competencies of Successful Global Professionals. And Paula, one of the things that I know is so interesting is your story of how you got involved in this to begin with. So would you share a little bit about this initial journey that kind of opened your eyes up to this whole idea of global cultures?
Sure. It's a little unelegant, but I was 1987. I was studying abroad in Rome, Italy. I am a blue-collar kid from Buffalo, New York. And if anyone remembers the fall of 1987, there was Black Monday, the market crashed, the money I had saved was worth not that much. So my parents gave me a choice. They said, honey, you can come home or you can get a job. So my experience went from, September into part of October, running around with other Americans, having fun in Italy, to really working, going to school. And when on the weekends, when all of the other kids kind of scattered to go traveling, I stayed back in the dorms and made Italian friends and spent time with my relatives down in the South. Anyhow, returned back to finish out my college, and some psychology professors back at my university in Buffalo said, Paul, something's different about you. Something's changed. And they said, I said, I don't know. I don't know. I feel different. I don't know what it is. I'm in my familiar surroundings, but I just don't feel like me anymore. And they said, look, if this happened to you, it's happened to others, you should study it. So on my application to grad school, I said, I want to study what makes people effective living and working internationally. And I want to know how they change from deep developmental cross-cultural experiences. So my joke is that 30 several years later, I'm still studying what makes people effective living and working internationally and how they change from deep developmental cross-cultural experiences. But Meredith, I've been doing this, as you know, I'm a university professor. I've been doing it in the university setting, but also been working for the military and the Peace Corps. I've worked for profit nonprofits and for-profit organizations, big multinationals and small organizations. It's a very fundamentally human thing to need to become more culturally agile to succeed. So that's my story.
Love that. So, such diversity there, I think really helped prepare you for the work that you're doing. And I can hear that enthusiasm still in your voice, even 30 years later, because it's like my love for the communication skills side of people in the workplace. You never get to the end of it because there's always more to learn. There's always more to discover and help others discover. And I think one of the things that would be really useful for us kicking off this whole conversation is, what do you mean by this idea of cultural agility? Just so we have a common definition.
Sure, sure. So it's the ability we have as humans to be comfortable and effective in different countries, but also working with people from different cultures. It's a competency that we need anytime we need to build trust, collaborate, communicate, and it's not easily present in the world, so we need to build it. It's something we need to actively build in all of our roles.
Mhm. Well, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what is it that prevents us from automatically having this? Why is it a skill that needs to be developed over time? Where's the gap?
Yeah, it's such a critical question. You know, cognitive evolution hasn't quite caught up to biological evolution. We're still a little bit primal, right? So our brains don't love novelty. Our brains are inherently lazy. So by nature, we like familiarity. It's not because we're racist or sexist or xenophobic or whatever. It's just our brains are inherently lazy. So one is our inherent brains are inherently lazy. And the second thing is when we do go into situations of novelty, our brain kicks in a response that makes us kind of react in a way that kind of narrows our focus, which means that all the things that we should be attending to, all the things we should be observing, all the things that we should be asking about and curious about, we don't. We get kind of tunnel vision, in which case we tend to make a lot of mistakes. So we make a lot of mistakes when we're in new situations, and we make a lot of mistakes when we're with people who are just different, demographically different from us. Again, not because we have any inherent bias, it's just because that's sort of what our brains will do in situations of novelty. Why it's trainable is that you can learn to really sort of override that, slow down the kind of that knee-jerk reaction, slow down, and then process a little more effectively, be more curious, be more humble, really understand the context.
I'm just thinking of someone who's listening and wondering, okay, so what could I do to become more aware and be more open to curiosity, to exploring possibilities instead of wanting to get so narrow and so, return to my comfort zone?
Yeah, so there's a series of competencies that we can all work on. Things like our tolerance of ambiguity, our resilience, our perspective taking, humility, relationship building, curiosity. We can work on all of those, right? And each of them have a bit of a recipe that, it's something about how you're naturally wired, but combined with a lot of things you learn how to do. And curiosity, since you mentioned it, let's talk about that one as a competency. So what we tend to do is not know our natural limits for curiosity. Everybody thinks we're curious. Everybody thinks they're curious because they Google things like, oh, this is a question I'm going to Google it. That's not curiosity. Curiosity is inherently like just having a little more wonder about the people you're with or the situation that you're in or the context you're going into or the group you're joining or the company you're interviewing, whatever, right? It's just wanting to know more. And so what we try to do is encourage, hey, look at whatever your natural limit is, force yourself to ask 2 more questions. Just force 2 more questions. It's going to seem really awkward. It's going to seem like silly at first. But then what ends up happening is your bar changes and it resets to a little bit of a higher level of curiosity. And then once you get comfortable there, ask 2 more. You almost can't. Of course, there's situations where you don't ask questions, but you almost can't ask too many to better understand situations that are new and novel.
I also love that you mentioned humility. And so talk about the role that that has in this whole process of growing towards being more agile around culture.
Meredith, from the research, if I had one competency to hang my hat on, it would be humility. So humility in this case is really being able to say, you can be confident in your skills. You could say, I am a great chemist. I am a great journalist. I am a great physician. I'm a great university professor, whatever it is. All you're saying is that I just don't know how to be effective here. So for every leader who's listening, think about all the situations you're in where you don't want to denigrate your own skills. You don't want to, you're great at what you do, great at your technical skills. But success is oftentimes a function of you being able to be effective in that context. So taking the time to learn and navigate and ask questions and understand, like fully understand the situation you're in and the complexity of the situation you're in without using your own lens. That's really the fundamentals of that cultural humility.
I'm imagining someone saying, yeah, but I'm concerned about looking bad or looking like I don't know, like I should already know this. And so I'm going to be judged or criticized for not having this level of awareness, let's say, or knowing the right thing to do. So I'm concerned about asking and appearing humble, appearing like I don't know. How do you help someone get over that barrier?
Yeah, so that's actually a really, really important issue, especially in a multi-country, cross-cultural setting, because some cultures that are very hierarchical, you can lose credibility pretty quickly by saying, golly gee whiz shucks, I just don't know how it's done here. You do want to remain in that position of authority. You stay in that position of authority more broadly, and then within a smaller trusted circle, you're the one asking very targeted questions for knowledge, for understanding. And then ideally you have a trusted or a few trusted go-to folks who you can say, okay, here's what I'm hearing. Is this true? Or a few reliable sources that you can go to for information. Other cultures that are very egalitarian, walking in there and saying, you're the expert in this situation, I'm not. I know my stuff. I don't know yours. Tell me. So if you're an egalitarian culture, you can ask directly and you won't lose credibility. If you're in a hierarchical culture, you definitely need to finesse that a little bit more to make sure you still get the great information and get it accurately, but you do it in a way that everybody still sees you as sort of the key person or the most knowledgeable person.
Yeah, that's such a good example of one size doesn't fit all. You can't take one approach in every culture. So let's imagine it could be someone in a company that has only one individual or a small number of individuals that are from a different culture. Or it could be someone, like you say, that's in a global company. They're being placed in another country where they don't know some of the norms that need. How do you recommend people do the research to find out what is appropriate, what is the better way to do things versus going in cold and trying to learn as they go?
Yeah, so this is really where understanding what cultural agility is and does is so important, as you described. The kind of one side of it is understanding what could be different. It might not be what you're reading in the books or reading online or hear from your friends or hear from your colleagues, but you have to understand what could potentially be different. That's a really important first step because our brains aren't trained to see things they're not expecting. Again, our brains are inherently lazy, where our brains are designed to conserve energy. So our lazy brains go into a new situation and basically starts interpreting everything we expect to see. So first thing kind of off the top is do your research. So we offer through Skiilify, we offer a free resource. Anyone can go on anytime. You don't need to contact me or contact Skiilify. It's called MyGiide.com, but it's spelled funny. It's MyGiide.com. But you can go on there and learn about lots of different cultures, comparing cultural values to your own. So that's one resource, but there's lots. In the US, there's the State Department website. Some online sources are good. Just be a little bit careful. There's a lot of folks out there giving kind of, hey, I went to, Germany for 3 weeks, and now here's everything about, the German culture. Yeah, you just want to be a little bit careful of the sites that you're reviewing. So that would be one piece of it is really kind of do your homework. And then the other really big part of it is understand your competencies, like understand what you naturally leverage when you're in a situation of novelty. Everybody leads with something. It could be that you're really curious. It could be that you're really great at relationships. It could be that you can tolerate ambiguity longer than most people. Whatever it might be, kind of leverage that strength in that new context and then figure out how do you get to understand through the strength that you naturally have. And you can assess that on MyGiide as well.
So talk about the naming of MyGiide and the spelling, I should say. Also for, excuse me, the Skiilify, because you intentionally chose those for a reason.
Right. So Skiilify is a public benefit corporation, and we were designed. Our angel investor was wonderful. He basically said, "Look at this is way too important. We need to democratize soft skills. So it's way too important to just have buried waiting for clients to come to us. Let's just put it out there and put it out there for free." So he created us as a public benefit corporation. That's why a lot of this stuff is free. But the double I at the time was we led with the soft skill of cultural agility, and we wanted to help people see eye to eye. So Skiilify is spelled with 2 I's and 1 L, and MyGiide is spelled with 2 I's and no U. But the punchline around it is we're helping culture see eye to eye. Which we thought was cute, but it turns out if you need reading glasses, it's a little hard. It's hard to see 2 eyes together when you need reading.
Well, we'll put both of those on your show notes page.
Great.
I want to make sure my listeners understand the real value of this free assessment that you've created and make available. In MyGiide, they're going to be answering questions that help them really understand those strengths, like you're talking about, these areas of competence, where they excel and where they may need to do some work in order to really shine if they want to be effective working. And I'll just say, with diverse populations, because it can, again, be within the company, within their community, or globally.
Yeah. And it's a really nice tool to just start the conversation. I do workshops all the time where I'll have groups, whether it's, if it's a small company, the entire company, or a team or whatever, the group will take take MyGiide and just start talking about where they are on the continuum. So are you more egalitarian or hierarchical? Are you more formal or informal? Are you a direct communicator or an indirect communicator? But what's nice is what we have everyone do, and again, you can do this for free, is you default to your home country first. So if you're from India, click India. If you're from the United States, click United States. And what very quickly pops out is that you're not exactly the average of other Americans or Indians or whatever who have taken the tool. Of course you're different. So then the conversation begins with, well, how were your values socialized in your life? You weren't born with them. Where did they come from? And some people, they have these really beautiful ways of sharing their narrative. It could be the way they were raised at home. It could have been their education. It's usually a combination of many things: their profession, the organizations where they work, their sports, their faith communities, whatever those socializing agents were. And then putting people together and then starting to just have the conversation about, oh, we're both really, fixed time and not fluid time. Where did yours come from? Oh, my parents were really prompt. Where did yours come from? Oh, I was in the military. Like, where one value can have different socializing agents, but people can actually express the same behavior. So it's actually a really nice way to get people. So from a DEI perspective, I mean, it's just such a nice way to just stop talking about demographic difference and start talking about us as humans and hey, we've got different backgrounds and stories.
One of the things I like with your assessment is it is a continuum. It's not an either or. It's, how much do you lean this way versus that way? And just having that level of awareness of where are your most, I won't say extreme, but the strongest indicators, how far, on either end of the continuum you might be. And that to me alone would help people appreciate some of those differences that, again, they could have either culturally or just one-on-one with different folks. And I love that you emphasize this idea of it's a place to start a conversation from, because then you can explore without judgment or assumptions why? And the curiosity gets to come in, right? Of, I want to learn about where did your, this focus on being on time or, being more fluid with time, I think is such a good one. Because I was raised with you are on time, you're early, actually, not.
If you're early, you're on time. And I was raised with, like my dad used to set our kitchen clock 7 minutes back because we were always late for everything. But then we always just calculated 7 minutes back, so we were always still even late. It was
Yeah.
fun. It became like a family lore. The clock
Mhm.
at 7 minutes.
And just thinking about that one thing in application in a workplace, even without necessarily culture differences, but just our how we're raised and the values we each bring to the workplace and our assumptions about everyone ought to be this way, like this is the right way. And so that's just a little tiny microcosm of so many other areas that impact the culture we create within our own families, or if we're the leader of a team, within our team members. I'd love for you to talk more about the kind of training that you do. What do you focus on? What do you help people do to make that transition? And talk about why your training or how your training is different from what you've seen with a lot of other DEI type training that focuses on things like unconscious bias.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with the last part of that question because the unconscious bias really hits a nerve for me. Um, every human, I hate the fact that we've called it bias because it's not. It's just a function of our limbic system. For however old we are, however long we've been wandering this planet, we've collected data and stored data. And our brains that are inherently lazy walk into situations and the reflective response, within a tenth of a second, will be to use that stored data. That's it. But we are cognitively complex human beings. Most of us don't walk around the world just responding to, our limbic system. We are definitely more evolved than that. And I think when we can build some skills to understand how to be in novel situations and be with people who are demographically different, it fosters those connections. Here's what's happened though in the world of unconscious bias training. Everyone now learned that they have a limbic system. Everyone learns that we have inherent biases. Okay, well, biases in quote marks. I know this is this is a podcast, but I'm putting air quotes around the word biases. They're not actually okay. So we now know this. Well, what will we do as humans being told we have a bias? Well, you're going to kind of avoid the situations in which your bias flags will fly, right? So people who would normally have conversations to understand people's full, selves, right? Like, oh, wow, you're a Yankees fan. So am I. Oh, wow, you play the violin. I did too. Oh gosh, you're driving, this Tesla. So am I. Like whatever the point of connection is, starts to move away because you're just so nervous about the bias, about having that bias. And that unfortunately is the backlash that we're seeing with this. And unfortunately, it's at the same time when we're becoming more and more and more kind of entrenched in social media communities that are kind of shaping a very rigid identity. And that's a lot of psych speak for I'm sorry that's happened. I am sorry that's happened. And what I'd like to see happen is that we get comfortable first understanding. And so you asked about my training. So what we begin with is, using things like MyGiide, we just begin with a conversation about where did your values come from? It's okay to have great open conversations about the way you were raised. My mom's family was like this. My dad's family was like this. Oh gosh, I lived in a rural community or an urban community, whatever it is. Where do they come from? And then once you can kind of understand your own narrative, start to get curious about others. Now, depending on the group, oftentimes, usually it's with a group or a team. We'll actually show team scores anonymously, so where everyone is on the continuum, so if there's a lot of variance across the continuum, or if there's a lot of similarity. And then we just sort of say, okay, well, what does this look like? What is this, how is this playing out in your reality? And usually they see it, they see the points of challenge. And then we talk about, okay, well, where do you want us to be? Like, is there a right way here, or is it true? Is it okay that behaviorally we vary? And then we have those conversations. So that's like kind of a lot of what we do. So that's on the value side, and then on the competency side, we spend a lot of time helping people identify their own competencies. So that those were the tolerance of ambiguity, resilience, perspective taking, humility, and the like. Then we spend a lot of time saying, okay, well, how would you leverage your strengths? How have you used them in the past? Really help people own them. And then we move into how do we build those that we need to build. Each one of these can be developed. Each one of these has an approach. Each one can be practiced. So we spend some time on that as well. And all in, it's a good session. It's a really good session. People like it, use it, and then because there's a lot of resources available, they can kind of keep practicing and practicing. So it's sticky, which is nice.
Yeah, these competencies, I would think every one of them is something that could be developed, right?
Absolutely.
Do you refer to those as skills, or what's the distinction you might make between, say, a skill and a competency?
Yeah, so a skill, by definition, is a practiced act. I think of a competency as a blend of behaviors you can learn and practice, and also an awareness of what and who you are naturally. Let me give you an example. Let's use tolerance of ambiguity as one. So somebody who's high in tolerance of ambiguity can go into a new situation or meet somebody who's new, and they can just suspend judgment longer than others. Suspend judgment, their brains just don't go to cognitive closure quite so fast, which is good. So we want more tolerance of ambiguity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So tolerance of ambiguity, though, kind of has like all these competencies do. It has a recipe. And so some of this is kind of how we're wired, how our bodies are wired to handle serotonin and dopamine, sort of like our comfort level with situations of novelty. So we have to understand some of the sort of immutable parts of us and realize, where I'm starting is going to be different from where someone else is starting. And then we say, okay, all right, regardless of start point, let's think about what we can work on. Let's go from there. Tolerance to ambiguity, the recipe for that, the skill, if you will, is understanding the edge of your comfort zone, stepping beyond it, being in it, being successful in it, not going too far because then you just retreat back to your comfort zone, not giving yourself enough of a stretch because then you don't grow. We did study after study with this, and it's fascinating that as soon as you get people into that stretch zone and kind of keep them there with the right support and the right, like whatever, keep them there for a little while, their tolerance for ambiguity builds. It's one of the ones, even though it has such a heavy component that's immutable, that's genetically wired, it still can be built in a really profound way.
Oh, I'd love for you to talk more about that study. What did you do? I assume you did things to help people stretch, and how you identified, where is enough but not too much so they don't retreat back to that comfort zone.
Yeah, so we used MyGiide to identify individuals kind of at their baseline. And then, it actually, in fairness, this was an experiment that it naturally occurred. We just happened to have the data. So we were able to sort of parse this out, which was beautiful. So we were able to look, I'll just kind of make it really simple. So we were able to look at people who had, high cultural agility versus low cultural agility. So high tolerance for ambiguity, low tolerance for ambiguity. And then we put them into situations where they were doing service learning, either in domestic situations. These were corporate volunteers who were on loan to nonprofits and NGOs for 3 to 6 months. They could have served either domestically, so maybe in a local nonprofit, or they could have been allocated to, if they wanted to, they could have gone to kind of an extreme location and worked with an NGO. And then we kind of compared the groups that were kind of lower intolerance of ambiguity. So if they were lower intolerance of ambiguity and then went to someplace domestic, they didn't really stretch, right? If they were lower intolerance of ambiguity and they did go to someplace local, that was even a stretch and they grew. If they were higher intolerance of ambiguity and they went to the international spot, they grew. If the opposite were the case, either they didn't grow or they retreated back. You really kind of needed to match the experience to the person's level. Sorry, I made that a little more complicated than it should have been, but
it makes perfect sense to me.
Oh,
because the more extreme location that you are going to get involved with, the more unknowns there are. So that tolerance for ambiguity, to me, makes sense that it would need to be on the higher end for someone to feel excited about and have a good experience and learn from being put in that situation. Where someone with the low tolerance for ambiguity, there would just be so many things, they would be somewhat overwhelmed, and I could see where they would retreat or contract to feel safe.
And we found it again with a student. So that was a corporate sample. But with our students, we were finding that when they went to study abroad, if they were low in cultural agility, but they had a buddy with them, like just a friend from school who traveled with them, their world got much bigger and their tolerance for ambiguity grew because there was something helping them expand their bandwidth. Whereas those who were already high in cultural agility, they needed to kind of do it alone. They needed something that was a little more of a challenge, or they didn't grow.
That's so interesting. Are there any other research projects that you have going on now that are studying these different aspects of cultural agility?
Yeah, I've got a really cool one going on now that's looking at virtual experiences. So I'm working with an organization called Global Brigades. So these are the groups that organize kind of either companies or universities to send teams of people into service learning opportunities for a week or two with indigenous and rural populations, and basically help them with their businesses, or help them with a medical brigade, or help them with an engineering brigade, whatever the need might be. It's kind of like a mini version of Peace Corps. But they also, because of COVID 4 years ago, they also started something that was really unique, and it was these virtual brigades. And I remember thinking, and people were asking me, "Oh, well, is this working for building cultural agility?" I'm thinking, in theory it should, but we're not exactly sure. So right now we're comparing a virtual experience with the in-person experience. And I have a feeling it's going to follow the same trajectory, that those who were pretty high in cultural agility need to be on the ground in order to build. And those who are pretty low in cultural agility, this will be enough of a stretch.
I'm curious, with what happened with COVID and people having to work so much more virtually and remotely, did that have impact on cultural agility for people that were working globally or needed to move into global work?
Yeah, so there's a lot in there. So one of the things that I think the world got a lesson in what our brains do when under stress. So if you think about, we craved, it's hard to even remember those first few weeks and months of COVID, the fear, right? Fear people had. And if you remember, what were people doing? They were baking, they were making comfort food, they were connecting via Zoom with family, close family, friends. Everybody was kind of retreating. We humans under situations of stress go to comfort, cognitive comfort, emotional comfort. That's the most natural thing we do. It doesn't change when you go into start a new job, or get a new team, or go meet a new client. This is still kind of a situation of new and novel stress. So it was a lesson to be learned. Second thing that happened, everyone moved to virtual, right? I have a feeling we're going to start to see a swing back. So the belief was we don't need to get on planes anymore. There's no need to be having meetings. We shouldn't have to get on a plane to have a meeting. I have a feeling in situations where trust is critical, we're going to see people getting back on planes because there's something about whether it's mirror neurons or just the connection that two people make when they're kind of facing something together that is better for trust. They bring more parts of themselves to a one-on-one personal conversation when they're in the same room, when they're having lunch, when they go out for dinner, than they would on Zoom.
The shared experiences create a bonding effect. I would love for you to talk.
And it allows us to bring out more of ourselves. Remember, if we're just reduced to, oh, you're the person over in purchasing, or you're the head of tech, you know, if you're just reduced to those parts of your dimension, that parts of who you are, then you naturally kind of retreat into that versus, oh, I'm also, you know, a rugby player, I don't know whatever it is you are, you know, a photographer, you know, whatever those things are that might kind of form a bond of connection, and then we become less tribal. So I'm not sure we can get there via Zoom. Maybe we can.
Well, you mentioned trust, and of course, I think trust is such a key piece, both trusting others and being trustworthy. How does that all fit in to creating someone being more agile in terms of corporate agility?
Yeah, so trust, I mean, kind of a great leadership lesson is the realization that trust is formed kind of in, I'm just going to oversimplify it, but sort of two ways, right? It's either your competence and credentials make you a trustworthy source, or your relationship and your connection to others makes you trustworthy. And if you're a leader or you're going into any situation where you need to be trusted, it's always best to assume both will be needed. Because oftentimes we just over rely on the one that makes sense to us. Well, if I lead with all of my credentials, clearly everyone will trust me. And it could be, well, they don't know me and they don't trust me. Or it could be like, I'm just going to be kind of accessible and connected and everyone's going to trust me. And it could be, nope, they need to see the track record. They needed to see that you were, you know, true to who you said you were, and you actually did all the things you know how to do, and you have proof of that. So I'd say, you know, kind of advice to leaders going into a multicultural situation or going into a situation that's new to them is to think about both aspects of trust and how they can establish their credibility, but also establish that connection.
So it sounds like they need to find out what the criteria might be for a given group or a given culture on what it's sort of like what you were referring to earlier with understanding what the hierarchy is and when to be most open and vulnerable about what you don't know. It seems like here, similarly, what's important in establishing trust? Do I need to tout my credentials? Do I need to, whatever the actions?
Let someone else tout your credentials. Don't do it yourself because you don't want to fail.
Yes, right. So, you know, what would you recommend in general for people to get the lay of the land, so to speak, for this group or an individual that they need to meet with and they want to connect with in a meaningful way?
Right. So at the highest level, understand that it can be different. And I know that seems like I'm starting at the most basic point, but you'd be amazed at how many people that becomes an aha moment, that they didn't even realize that people didn't establish trust the same way they did. So one, realize that it could be different. Second, you want to be able to understand how you naturally would establish trust, and that we, you know, that MyGiide, you can go on and again look at values and understand that a little bit. Then the third would be understand what could potentially happen in the situation you're going into. So if you're going into an organization like a buttoned up established finance company, you might, you know, learn that that's going to be more formal and more achievement oriented. So you want to lead with your credentials. So what could potentially be different is not what will be different. So then kind of the last thing is that you want to go in and sort of read the context that you're in. How do people connect with one another? How do people become trustworthy? Who's leading? What qualities do they have? What are you observing? What are you reading? What are you hearing about? How do people, who do they admire? You know, that often says a lot when you ask companies to point to sort of the stars of the organization.
You know, what you're saying to me seems like it points to the need to have a trusted advisor in that environment who can guide you and help you learn, kind of accelerate your learning curve. So you're not just discovering this as you go, but you come in with an understanding in advance. Are there some other ways that someone can get this kind of understanding?
That's a really good way. And I have to, like, so much so that when I teach my MBA classes, I'll often say one of the things they're graded on at the end of the semester is how well they know one another, like how many details they can remember of each other, because we have this highly multicultural class, right? You know, lots of different countries are represented in my MBA class. And I always say, look, who would better to be a kind of a go-to advisor than somebody who remembers you when, somebody who you were in class with together. So you really think about you're putting together your team of advisors through this class. And so going forward, as you described, that's a really good way. Is think about who do you trust. Ideally, sort of the ideal, the perfect advisor is someone who knows you and your style, but also knows what's needed in the new context, and will be able to answer the question. So for an individual, for every leader out there to ask the question, how to be successful here? You're not denigrating your skills. All you're asking is for clarity about that context. How can I be successful here? And if somebody's really good at saying, oh, Paula, yeah, your style is really informal. And you know what? I know that group, I know that culture, I know that team. You're going to have to dial it up and be more serious, more formal, or you'll lose them. They won't take you seriously. But, you know, every situation's a little bit different, but that's a really good question to remember.
You know, as I'm listening to you describe that, kind of affirming what I was thinking, it works so well in any new situation that we're going into, whether it's a culturally diverse group or not, they're unknown to us. And if it's new, whether we have a new position and we're going to be needing to work with people, not just on our team, but maybe a peer group as well, to get a sense of what's going to be required of me to be as effective as possible, not trying to, what's the word I want? Not trying to change who I am, but that whole agility. I love that word, you know, that ability to flex as a situation calls for and not be rigid about, well, this is who I am, deal with it.
Yeah,
and doesn't get you very far.
It doesn't get you very far. And what's really fascinating that we found with global leaders in particular, that they could flex across three ways of responding. So understanding what's different is different than actually executing some behavior in that context, right? So what we found was that the best leaders in a multicultural setting knew when they needed to adapt, when they truly needed to change and comport their behaviors to the other. They also knew, though, when they needed to minimize, when they had to say, look, it's ethics, it's safety, it's production schedule, it's something. Even though it's different here, here's how it has to be. And then I'm going to have to persuade, motivate, cajole, whatever. Leaders had to kind of hold a standard. And then there's this third time where they're going to say, look, it's not going to be any one of our ways. It's not going to be my way or your way. We're going to co-create something that's new and unique for our team and for our group. And what we're finding in the research is that the best leaders can pull across those three levers when needed. So first being able to ask the question, how, what does success look like here? How, what's going to be different here? Or what challenges do you think I might have? But then also understanding when to pull with each, when to pull each of those levers.
That's excellent. I love that because it points again, there one size doesn't fit all. One approach isn't going to work in every situation. So you have to be agile even within the approach that you're taking. This is so helpful. Paula, I just love the work you're doing, and
Oh, thank
I
you.
admire your, consistency over the years and continuing to dig deeper and deeper. You truly have this level of expertise that's amazing. And I would love for you to share how people can connect with you, get a copy of your book, because I think that if they are interested in this topic and want to go deeper, you provide a lot of depth. And then also to access MyGiide. All of those are wonderful
Sure.
resources.
Sure. So the easiest way to connect with me is often through LinkedIn, and the biggest challenge with connecting with me is spelling my surname. So if they have your show, at least they'll be able to spell my surname and find me. I also have a LinkedIn learning course, a couple of them, on the building cultural agility and managing globally. So if you have a LinkedIn learning subscription, if you're connected with me on LinkedIn Learning, or on LinkedIn rather, I do my best to make them free as often as LinkedIn will let me. So you can take the courses for free. You can find excerpts of the book, and I put lots of content up about cultural agility. MyGiide, again, is spelled in a funny way. It's MyGiide, but that will get you to lots of free resources to also just go ahead and independently build your cultural agility.
Great. Thank you for all that you have put into this and all the resources you're making available for free or almost free for people who are interested in developing these competencies so they can be culturally agile, because I think that's so needed in this day and time, and the contributions that you've made are so important. Thank you, Paula, for the work you're doing and for being on my show today. It's just been delightful talking with you.
Thank you, Meredith. It's my pleasure. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free Facilitator Guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.